introduction stuff. So my name is Sabrina Santa Clara. I'm offering these sort of meditations that are geared towards helping us come into our more grounded self a little bit more easier than maybe some traditional meditations or traditional ways of working in IFS and working with our parts. I just didn't meet this person. And so they're intended to be of service. These are recorded. So if you do not want your face to be shown, you can always mute your video. And if you don't want to speak, then you could mute that, although the feedback is super helpful. So one of the things that we can do, so I have an assistant who puts these videos up. If you want to speak, which I encourage, but you don't want that to go on the video, that can be edited out. We can't edit out your image, but we can edit out the space that you're in. Does that make sense? So is it Mivan?
I just trying to get over to my other device. Yeah, Mivan.
And so does anybody know in advance whether they don't want their audio recorded? Okay. If you have any questions, if it feels like you've revealed something and you don't want it to be offered to other people as a service, then just send me an email and I will send it to my assistant who does all the editing, and she will remove that. We can't remove your face during out the whole process. And I love to see faces if you guys are willing, but certainly no expectation. And there we go. I got you on the other. So she will edit out a lot of this, just us babbling. So sometimes when I come into these meditation groups, I come in with an idea. I'm going to teach this, or I'm going to teach that. You know, I have some of those in the background, but I kind of like it when we have small groups, because then there's more time for connecting and there's more time for finding out what is actually needed in the moment, right? So if we just all took a moment, those of you who've worked with me before, you know that one of the practices I do that's basic, right, is you just start with breath. And so the invitation is just to become aware of your breath, not trying to do any pranayama or make it any special anything, but just noticing your breath. And you'll either want to close your eyes or lower your gaze so that the dominant visual centers of the brain don't take over, which allows us to go inward a little bit more. And then for most of us, our awareness is on our front body, our face, our chest, our bellies. And the invitation is, even though you are vertical, imagine energetically you are horizontal, and that awareness, or that energy awareness of your front body, begins to pull into your back body. That we begin to feel the all of us rather than just the front. You can even imagine feeling the back of your head, the back of your neck. You can orient to where your back body touches the seat behind you. And then just keeping that with maybe 20% of awareness. Just inviting an answer to the question, what has been the challenge this last week? What's the struggle? Is it staying grounded, thinking too much, loneliness? Where are the areas or aspects of your inner life that want attention or want relief? I'm not efforting to find the answer. We're just opening up a space for those parts to step forward. And taking one more breath. And then coming back to this group. Is there anything that came up in that quick question? There's no obligation to speak. There's no obligation to name anything. I think in smaller groups, what I like to do is offer an opportunity to offer a meditation that might be suitable, most suitable to what's alive in the group. And if not, I always have things. So, is there anything that is particularly alive in this group?
What came up for me is this sort of wobbly sense of I'm in a big change process, and I'm a little bit in the very unfamiliar to me, sort of sometimes euphoric and big energy releasing, but then kind of like feeling like I'm hovering above the sort of reality things and maybe things I should be doing or trying to be responsible. Voices sort of telling me, parts telling me, or advisee, like trusted people telling me to not ignore I wonder if I'm hovering over top of the loss and grief in the change process that I'm in. And so that's sort of what came up for me, is like I want to be in this very unfamiliar, allowing positive feelings, which I don't get that often. I don't want to be bypassing whatever else is there. And I also don't want to be doing my sort of lifelong family pattern of like, oh, let's not think about the money or the material or the realities. Let's just not think about that. And then it all goes down the drain or something.
So that sort of, in Buddhism, we talk a lot about the middle path, right? Which is the not too much, not too little, not too tight, not too loose.
Mm-hmm.
So being in the present moment, also with an eye towards the future.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Got that. Anybody else want to speak for what is alive in them right now?
I just started a 12-week nervous system regulation class. So I've been both excited and a little nervous. I've been processing stuff for 2.5 years. So I feel like part of me is like, well, a lot of stuff has come up. So it shouldn't be that hard. And then it's like, well, maybe all that's left is big stuff. So it's that duality of excitement and worry and hope. Yeah.
Thank you. Sandy, anything for you? Your mic is off.
It's kind of similar to what Lori and Mivan said. I feel like I've been derailed probably most of my life, but especially the last 10 years. And I feel I was talking to or emailing with a friend today, and I said, you know, I feel like I've been in a very deep, very dark tunnel, and I'm starting to come out. And I'm feeling lighter, more optimistic, more energetic, and trying not to stay too anchored in. You just set aside 10 of the prime years of your life. I mean, just fell off the tracks. So again, there's this balance of loss, grief, but hope.
Well, you know, and there's this thing I feel like that happens is that, you know, we have our idealized self and our idealized life. And then we compare ourselves and our lives to this idealized life. Right. And so then the last 10 years feels like, I wasted the last 10 years, or I messed up here and I should have been, rather than what if that is your path? What if that's exactly what was supposed to happen for this life for you? What if this was your lesson? Right? What if the stumbles and what if the ruptures and what if the struggle is part of what you needed to learn in order to come to the next transition? You know, and I think about some of the most challenging experiences of my life, some that were caused by my own, you know, my own process or my own parts, right, as a response of my own trauma, right? That some of those most challenging experiences are the things that opened up a doorway into something that was really beautiful. And what if those hard moments are the path? You know, we have this sort of idealized something we're always comparing to, right? And most people that I know, you know, I'm 58, almost 59. Most people I know are not entirely together. We are still figuring it out, right? And we still have parts that we're cleaning up and parts that we're trying to live into and traumas that we're trying to clean up, right? And so that's sort of my invitation to ponder on what if even the mundane, messy, bullshit stuff is the sacred path? What if there is no separation? Right? So that's something to ponder. And on that note, does my guest want to say anything across the way?
Sure.
Can you hear him over there? Because he can't
I
speak in
turned
the
my
computer.
video off,
Right.
but,
Can you guys hear him?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
well, thank you for having me, by the way. My name is Alexi. Yeah, I felt very dysregulated. I ended up here for multiple reasons, but the struggle for me lately has been a lot of anxiety, and I'm just trying to settle down and have faith that things are gonna re-equilibrate.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
All right. Okay. I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but let's start by going inside and we'll see where the meditation takes us. I usually do two. So this will be the sort of, we'll see what happens. And then I'll give you one of the maybe more common ones that I do. All right. So let's just start with, again, breath as always. So the invitations I always sort of invite when we're orienting to our breath is We're not trying to get anywhere. We're not trying to breathe big. We're not efforting to do anything. If there is any invitation, it's really to just get out of the way, right? Your breath already knows how to breathe you, right? Your breath breathes 24 hours a day without you having to do a single thing. And so all we're doing is just actually becoming aware that our bodies are taking care of us constantly. Our lungs are breathing. Our heart is pumping. Our bellies are digesting. Our lymphatic system is cleansing. Our liver is cleansing. Our white blood cells are removing. So without any effort from us, we are being taken care of. Even when we're not aware of it. So let's begin by just becoming aware of the beautiful body that is constantly taking care of us. And notice when I say the beautiful body, what arises. If there's any judgment around the outside shape or critique of our bodies, notice that. And we can inform that part that maybe has some critique about our bodies or how we're doing bodies. And just let the awareness of our bodies that are constantly taking care of us, let that inform that part. And then when we name our body, notice what you're aware of in your body. What calls to your attention? Oftentimes it's the places that are uncomfortable. So keeping an awareness of the uncomfortable places with maybe 20 or 30%. And then bring your attention to the many areas that are not uncomfortable. Like my eyes or my hair follicles or my skin. So that both the uncomfortable and the comfortable are here. And then returning to the places that are of discomfort. And so those may be strictly physical, or it may be the physical, emotional, energetic combined. So perhaps it's anxiety with a clenching in the heart. Or perhaps it's stress and burden with a sense of weight or tightness in the back or shoulders. Or perhaps it's just a general weariness. And as you breathe, offer your breath to that aspect of you, be it physical, emotional, or energetic. That we're not just breathing for us, we're breathing for the tight belly, or the heavy heart, or the mind that is thinking, thinking, thinking. We're just offering it breath as a source of support, not to change it, not to make it be any different, but just as an act of care and love. And then coming in specifically to the physical sensation of discomfort. It might be very overt, it might be very subtle. And if there's nothing uncomfortable, you can just choose a place in your body that maybe might want some attention. And again, coming back to your breath. And as you notice the physical breath, the expansion and contraction, notice how your breath actually isn't just in your chest, but as you breathe, actually, the breath expands the sides of your rib cage. And if you were leaning against a couch or a supportive something, you might even notice more subtly that the rib cage and the back body even expands a little bit as you inhale. You can feel it pressing in just a little bit into couch or seat behind you. And so you might become aware of the entire circumference of your body expanding and contracting. And so letting the breath be in its fullness as it so chooses. And now begin to focus on the area of your body of discomfort or the area of the body that desires attention. And as you inhale, as the physical breath is doing its thing, imagine that that energetic breath is actually moving into all the microscopic cells of that target area. And with each inhale, those cells begin to plump up just a little bit. They aerate just a little bit. So that there is more space in the very cell itself. And in the expansion of these many millions of cells, that target area begins to expand as well. Again, we're not forcing anything to change or relax. We're just offering breath. You might try out an internal phrase like, all of me is here. All of me is here. Every part of me deserves a breath. Every aspect of me is welcomed into this breathing. Into this space is welcome an anxiety. Kindness, a hope, a confusion, a joy, a longing. Breathing yourself bigger. Breathing into the energetic space around you. Now becoming aware that there is a group of 5 of us together. Notice what happens to your internal awareness just as I name that. I'll come back to it. See if it's possible to blend the energetic awareness with all of us here together. So there is a you, and there is an us. And taking one more breath. And when you're ready, opening your eyes and coming back into the shared group. Part of the reason why I do these groups is not because everything is going to work for everybody. It's exactly because it's not, right? That there may be a 15-minute meditation and like, these things, ugh, right? But oh, that one thing was important. Oh, the breathing into my cells, that like meant something. Or what happens when we come back into group. And noting what was the important component so that you can begin to take those out throughout your day, right? So it may be every time I drink a water, I remember, oh, breathe into my cells or back body, or, oh, I'm not just alone. I have actually people in a Sangha and a community together, right? And so this is an invitation to sort of step forward and speak and notice what you notice, even if it's like, wow, I couldn't get out of my head, right?
Well, I absolutely loved that our body functions without us and it's taking care of us all the time. I was having a lot of anxiety about 2 months ago. I was just in a health anxiety crisis loop. And I'm a hairstylist and I have a client who's a doctor. And he said, there's a reason that it's called the autonomic nervous system. He goes, we don't need to know. We don't control it. It controls itself. And you don't need to worry about all of your bodily functions.
Right.
And it was very freeing
Hmm.
to not have to worry about it. And then when you said that, it's just like such a beautiful thing to remember. It's always taking care of us.
Right. Constantly. Right.
Yeah.
And so we have this, especially when we're in crisis, our brains automatically have a negativity bias, right? It's this sort of beautiful, functional thing that is our survival technique. And I always say, like, it's not important that the tree leaves are green and they flutter in the wind. It's important that we notice the snake under the tree. So we're always looking for the snake, right? And my personal belief is that we live in a world where we're not actually, for most of us, navigating our actual physical survival. And so our minds kind of have to put that negativity bias somewhere. Then if we have trauma, and then if we have all the things that we have in this culture, in this world, then it gets super amplified. Right. And so these practices of coming back into what is good. I used to teach a kind of yoga called Anusara, and that was one of the main principles, was looking for the good. So we would never correct somebody's position without saying, this is what's beautiful. Right. And then when there was a correction, it was an invitation. We never, for example, pushed on somebody's back in downward dog. We would put their hand in front of their chest and say, reach towards my hand. Right. And so there's a very different orientation in what happens when we look for the good. It's really easy to focus on the shoulders that are tight rather than my lungs are breathing without me. My muscles are working. Like, I have had several massive injuries. I have a chronic medical condition. And I have to tell you, I appreciate my body so much more now than I did when it was doing all the perfect things, because I know how badly things can go, right? And so having just a practice to acknowledge, do you guys know who Thich Nhat Hanh is?
Mhm.
Beautiful body meditation with this sweet lilty voice, right? Which is like, he'll be like, and then notice your arm and say, hello, my beautiful arm. Right? And we are so unloving with our bodies, both external and internal. Right? So even just the practice when anxiety hits, to remind ourselves, my blood is doing its job without me. Like all the things that, like, I never think about my pancreas, for example, right? And yet all those things are going well. It's really easy for me to focus on like the one thing, like, oh, my life is relatively together, comparatively speaking. I have not figured out the relationship thing. I'm unpartnered and single, and no one's on the horizon, right? And so that is a certain amount of grief in my life. But if I just focus on that, I don't see that I have amazing friends and time to read and a dog I love, and I live in a place that I really like. If I just focus on this, I will cause my own misery. Right? Any others want to speak? What worked? What didn't work?
One of the things that I found in both the back body breathing and just kind of the opening to what is and welcoming it all is finding there's room for it all. I mean, it seemed like it used to feel very much like I can't deal with one more thing. To push it away or judge it or, sort it. And it's easier just to sit with it, just like sitting with your body is doing its thing, and then I'm not as reactive to it.
The natural impulse is to contract against what we don't like, right? To move away from, if there's somebody physically that was scary, we would, contain. And we have a tendency to do that whenever there is a discomfort, right? We do this tightening. And it may be very subtle, but what that does, it's almost like we're bracing, right? But in that bracing, it doesn't allow us to breathe, and it doesn't allow us to take up our fullness. And so it's almost like we have all this stuff inside of us, right? We've got all our drama and all our pain and all our muck. And then we try to compress it. If I compress it, then it will be small enough for me to deal with. But then actually what happens is the pressure begins to build. And then we either explode or we implode. Right? And some of us have sort of our normal explosion or implosion. Women tend to do a lot more implosion, not always. Right? Men tend to do more explosion, not always. Right? Part of that is culturally mediated, part of it, and I say culture, I'm not just talking about our big culture, I'm also talking about family culture, right? And so the practice for that is exactly, which is why almost all meditations begin with breath, right? Because if we begin with breath, we begin to take up a little more space, right? And so that invitation to breathe yourself bigger is really about taking up your energetic space. And you can even do it. Let's just try it opened eyes for a moment. Right? Because when we're open eyes, this is like, it's one thing to practice these things when we're closed eyes and internal. It's another thing when we're in relationship to someone else, because our social brains will kick in, right? And they want to dominate. And yet learning this practice in relationship is the best thing that we can do when we're trying to hold our ground with someone else, right? Right. And so even as start off with lowering your gaze and just breathe yourself bigger. Imagine you're breathing the sort of energetic container at the skin level. And now see if you can breathe yourself bigger, maybe about half an arm's width out. So claim all of that energetic space. And now bring your eyes up to the screen. And look around, see if you can make eye contact with someone. And keep that energetic space so that there's still a you in relationship with someone else, where it doesn't feel like there's this coming in. So there's two solid people in relationship. And when we do that, there's actually more intimacy. Because to have more intimacy, there has to be two individual eyes being in relationship. It's that dual, it's that, sort of paradox is the more individual we are, the more we can actually connect with each other. And so just this practice of back body energetic space can help you hold your ground in relationship. Right? Not only to other people, but to our parts. So everything that I'm telling you, like go into your back body and breathe, and like, if you think about it, all of our parts have an embodied self, right? So if you pick, let's just go inside for a moment and pick one part that's been challenging, right? So Lori, when you talk about like nervous system regulation, like what part really holds that, right? Or the part that wants to sort of bypass, right? La, 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 right? And invite that part of you to breathe into its back body. Invite that part of you to breathe its full self. Invite that part into its fullness of its energetic space. And see if it's possible. And then try another part. Whether it's the anxiety or the grief or the whatever, right? As you breathe yourself bigger, invite that part to breathe itself bigger. Let the anxiety or the grief or the unknown have all the air it needs. And then coming back to the group. Were you able to do that? These things that I'm naming are things that have been really critical for me in my own process of sort of trauma resolution that I didn't know in the first 10, 15 years I was doing IFS, right? That my parts have a body. And if I give them the same tools that I'm using, they have a tendency to, oh, okay. In IFS, we talk about all of our parts have a self, and sometimes our parts have parts. And so what we're really looking towards is, in traditional IFS, what we're doing is we're working with our parts and trying to get in self. And the invitation is, how do I get into self quicker? Because when I'm working with my parts, it's much easier if I'm coming from a more grounded, whole place. Right? And it's easier if our parts actually have a little bit more self energy themselves. Does that kind of make sense? Any other thoughts, comments?
So giving them more energy and space doesn't give them more power. Because if they take over sometimes.
Right. What we're doing is we're so if we, first of all, we're focusing on breathing ourselves bigger, right? So the more in self energy I am, the more in this sort of expansive state that I am, the more capacity I have for all those parts, right? What we're offering them is the same quality to breathe, right? So we're using breath, we're using their own back body, we're using them to get more grounded because, we don't want to eradicate our parts. We want them to be fully present. We want them to know that we want them to be fully present. And if they can hold some of their self energy, they're not going to take over to the same degree. Right? But first, we're focusing on breathing ourselves bigger so that there's more space for them. Yeah. We've got about 10 more minutes left. I'd like to try a little something. That's okay. In the last little bit of time we have, and I'm not entirely stickler for time. I do have an appointment at 7:15. But let's go inside. Okay. And actually, don't close your eyes just yet because I'm going to show you some things. So we're going to look at orienting towards our bodies differently. So we typically think of our body as a muscle bone place, right? Just going about doing our things. And what the invitation is, we're going to look at finding the water in our bodies, right? And so I'm going to invite you to do some movements, right? Because you can't do this without liquid. If we were a solid, it would be, like this table, there wouldn't be any movement. It's because we have so much water in our body that we can do this. And this, right? And this, right? So now let's close your eyes and I'm going to invite you to all let your hands and fingers move in an aquatic way. Right? So let it be flowy. And we're just moving into sort of becoming aware of non-rigid state. Right? And allowing that to broaden out so that your entire arms are. Do you remember the feeling of being in a pool when you were a kid? And how weightless it felt? And you can even allow your spine to move almost like a little bit snaky, right? So we're looking for the soft water in the body. And just allowing that to be there, you can keep it into large movements or more subtle movements. In fact, the invitation is to come sort of back to the seat and just see if you can keep a subtle liquid movement in your spine and neck and shoulders. And just notice how it feels inside of you as you move into water states. Notice what happens with your mood. Notice if you're able to surrender into it or if you're in thinking states. And letting that movement become slow and luxurious. And really orienting to 70-ish% of your body as water. And then becoming aware of everybody in this group, of all of our bodies. 70% of us are water. So there's this sort of wateriness in this usness. And letting the awareness of bodies of water come into your mind state. Rivers, lakes, oceans. That the water in those bodies of water is the same water that's inside of you. So this essential element of river is you. The essential element of ocean is you. The dewdrops on the leaves is you. The rain that comes down from the clouds is the same liquid in your body. And so should you. And also, you are us. You are ocean. You are the dew on the leaf. You are the river. Same element lives inside you. And coming into the quiet stillness of the soft lake. So even if the body is not moving overtly, there is still wateriness and fluidity. All within you. And taking another breath or two. Coming back into this space together. And what did you notice as you just began to move and flow? Did anything shift inside of you?
Mine was a little jerky at first.
Did it find its way?
It did finally, yeah. It's like, oh, I'm creaky.
And once you found your way, what was your internal state? Like when you were creaky, were you like I'm creaky and noticing I'm creaky and having thoughts about being creaky?
Yeah, like that's not water.
Right, right. And then when you found the flow, is there a little bit less thinking?
A lot less than yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How about you, Cindy?
Just being.
Hmm.
And initially, I felt tightness in my neck, and tend to be self-conscious with movement anyway. But again, it just felt like a release, like something kind of opened up and created space
Right.
to the movement.
It's kind of like breath. The more that we don't effort to breathe and expand, then it just like, oh, it just does its thing. Right. And there's something that happens when we're trying, when we really want to be in a flow state. If we just stop and let our bodies find flow, typically the mind and the internal space will follow. And these are all tools like that are likely to enter us into these sort of isness states, or self energy, or awake awareness, or whatever language we want to use around that. Right? When I named that there was water inside all of us, then what happened to your mind state, or then what happened to it? Did it shift anything? May not have. Or when we talked about sort of the ocean and the river and the lakes, it's all the same element. Right? Did that have any impact on you?
I'm not sure when it was in the sequence of things, but I recall there was a point where I felt like I was trying to get or do something, and then I just kind of connected a little more to gravity, and things were just a little more subtle movement instead of a little bit of mobilized, like, okay, I'm moving like water now.
Right, like where I'm thinking I'm moving like water, right? And now I'm in my head space about it, right?
I was listening and you were offering different suggestions and different possibilities. It's kind of, I was trying things on, but then at a certain point I noticed I was a little bit like
Right.
Doing.
Exactly. And that's when we know we're being pulled out of self, right? When now we're efforting with the thing rather than like, oh, it's just an invitation, right?
Right.
As soon as we start efforting, right,
Yeah.
we can just go back and go like, oh, that's the moment where it's like, okay, I'm efforting. So let me just go back to where I did feel good.
Yeah.
And let me ignore all this other stuff because that's whatever. Right? And this is the thing about like language, like when we're in spaces, different cues can take us different places. There are people that I love. I have a teacher that I love, and I get a lot of information from how he teaches his meditation, but his prosody and the way that he teaches, like it takes me out every time. So I listen to him cognitively and I'm like, okay, how do I try that on with him when him not speaking? Right. Right.
Yeah.
So these simple practices, yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
I like going in and then out, because the ocean, I mean, we did that last time we met, where we had some nature-based meditation. And so it was both the opening on the inside, but then a bigger engagement. I mean, the ocean is my favorite place in the world. So kind of getting back into the sound and the movement of the waves and stuff was really nice.
And so that is, part of the practice of that middle path is oscillating our attention from the me. In these groups, I always go, here's the me, and remember we're within us, right? That we're doing this together. And there's the water in me, and then there's the ocean. I think last time we did mountains, right? And it was like zooming in and zooming out. And like now I'm on the path, or am I watching the path? right? And that all of those things, if we can be watery with them, right, oscillate our awareness, then we don't get too heavy in the individual I, and we don't get lost in the mass, ungroundedness of spiritual bypass. And ultimately, we remember that, we're not alone in this, right? We all have beauty and wateriness and oceanness, and we all have anxiety and sadness and grief, and that when we hold a bigger space for it, not only in our internal state, but within community, then we don't have the burden of the obsessive self-oriented mind of me, my, rather than, oh, this is just grief. We all do this. This is just, making a story about what my life is supposed to be like. Right? This is all like body critique. Oh, whatever, we're women in America, right? It's not, it is individual, and it's completely not. And we are individuals, and we need that individuality, and we also need that interbeingness. And when we can move back and forth between these poles of existence, right, we become more balanced in that process. Because living in the individual I is a horrible place to live on your own. It's isolating. And yet, when I talk about intimacy comes from that individual I, we have to have that individual I. And yet, if we really want to know godness, or that juicy intimacy space, we have to know how to sort of do that sort of merging and individuating balance.
Mhm.
So I appreciate all of you for coming and for being present and engaged in questions and feedbacks and all that good stuff. And I teach every 2 weeks. I do one evening, one daytime. So if you're on my notice, which is I'm assuming how you got here, I'll send out another notice. And it was lovely spending time with each of you.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for the offering.
Much love to you all.
Now I have a question. Do we get to see this again? Like, are you?
I have somebody who is putting these videos up. So when she has time, she does it.
Okay.
First one is up. The second one, I believe, is going up at some point. But, it takes time to edit and put it up. I don't have time to do that. So
When you buy a class, then you'll be able to rewatch.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what if, like, I can't, I'm not going to be available on the 9th for the one on the 9th.
Mm-hmm.
But if I buy it, can I watch it?
You don't even have to buy it. All of them are going up on YouTube. They will be free, right?
Oh,
so you don't have to come to the classes. They will be available, but the engagement is where the juicy stuff is.
well, yeah, that's the best part.
Right. So it is sort of my kind of offering to this isn't to make money, although, there's a little nod to, make an offering, right? But it's mostly about being of service to community.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Good night.
Have a good night.
Bye.